Jonathan, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, it's I've heard people talk about maybe the Reformation that we have coming our way, and it's I guess the words like that are only able to really be used in hindsight of something that happens, can't they? But certainly what's happening right now does seem to be quite massive for us. But how massive that is and how much it affects change is probably too early for us to tell. Mm-hmm. But I think we would be naive to say this isn't a major shift for us. We did a series here at Grace City called Seismic Shifts recently, where we just tried to reflect on what are the seismic shifts that we need to embrace. And we were going through the book of Acts, and certainly the story throughout 2,000 years of church history shows that the church often moves. It's meant to be a very agile, I guess, movement, a community of faith that's able to respond to the challenges around it. And so I guess even as we talk about change and moving forward, I almost want to go back a little bit in that discussion to go, the church has been in a similar place before, and the churches that were able to adapt to the challenges around them and respond to the moment tended to thrive. Disruption can lead to greater mission. This is certainly a theme throughout the book of Acts. And so, you just look through 2,000 years when the church has gone through world wars and a series of pandemics, persecution, financial meltdowns, all sorts of things. And yet the church has survived, and not just survived, but thrived in many of these contexts. And so I think even now, as we go through, through the pandemic and out the other side of a pandemic, as we go through the geopolitical situations going on, as we think about the way society is growing, not just apathetic towards Christianity, but hostile towards Jesus and the church, all these changes are able to respond. We're able to respond to. In fact, I guess just to say one last thing in that spot, I often think of a quote by Francis Schaeffer. Even though this quote goes back 40 years ago, it's still, I think, really appropriate for today. But he said the greatest challenge facing the church is to present unchanging truth to a changing world. And I think what we often do is we try to change truth in order to fit in with the changing world. And he's going, no, we need to realize the world is changing, but there are some things that fix, and there's some things we're agile. And an illustration that I often use is if we think about a mail going to an address, it's like the world has changed its address. We can't send the mail to the old address anymore. It's not going to be received in the letterbox. They're like, no, junk mail. That's kind of the perception. Even that analogy, of course, is faulty, because we would think more electronic mail anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's trying to go, we need to actually send mail to the address where people are, but it's still a particular mail that we need to send, that this truth message hasn't changed, but society and world around us has, and it's always been this way for a couple of thousand years. But when we can adapt to that and be agile, I think the church has always been in good shape to be able to respond.
Yeah, I think there's a decentralization of church going on. And with that becomes a sifting. I think it's giving people the opportunity to really be the church. We've talked about it for many years in ministry, and there's been different ways we can do that. But I think being able to decentralize and think, how do we actually care about the person who lives next door, sort of thing, who would engage in a faith conversation with us differently now than what they may have done before. The fact that we don't always come together in person is a change for us. But I think we've actually got to think of where people are at. Jesus went to people where they were, and I think that's the challenge, the opportunity we have. But this is where we also need to be agile and think, how do we actually turn up where people are? And I think the pandemic has helped us rethink some of that, not just to survive online because that was our only innovation that we could do to actually be who we feel we're called to be, But I think it's for us to be innovative because God himself is innovative. We want to be able to bring that timeless message to people in a relevant way, and we can use technology to do that. And we can actually empower people to do things a little bit differently. So, it does wrestle and mess with the ways we've led in the past, but there's a sense of excitement and opportunity that I actually don't want to miss as a leader in a local church.
Yeah, I love everything that these two guys have said so far. I think as I approach this, there's a couple of hats that I have on, that while I see a massive change happening, particularly in the last few years with COVID and lockdowns and, churches scrambling, and by and large, I'm pretty impressed with how local churches handled the move to technology and online. And I thought some little churches up and down the country and around the world did remarkably well during this time. And there's certainly been massive changes. At the same time, I'm a history buff. And as I look at the history of the church, the way JD touched on, the church has always undergone change. And so I'm a little reluctant, especially at this point, to say we're in this absolute game-changing moment that the church has never been in before. I just kind of think we need to maybe dial it back slightly and say we are definitely in a time of change.
Yep.
I think JD's right. How big that change will be, we will only know in retrospect.
Yeah.
The other part that I bring is as the associate director of this ministry that works with amazing leaders who need training around the world. The church is not in decline. The church is flying in many of those cultures, and they're flying in cultures actually where their society around them is much more hostile to them than we have had up to this point. And so I guess I'm just coming to this conversation saying, yep, we always need to do church different. We always need to be thinking about where is our society moving, because society doesn't stay still. But I don't want us, I guess I'm cautious about overestimating necessarily the amount of change, and whether that means we reinvent absolutely everything, or we, what do we do here? How do we manage this really well?